Once again, we turn to Conservative Home because, to be honest, whenever Daniel Hannan writes for something for Conservative Home, it is both funny, hilarious, and outrightly outrageously hilarious. So, to be honest, I wait I'm just making up a ton of words at the moment. I wait on tenterhooks, shall we say, to see whenever he will post his next illustrious piece here. And we've got to remember that Daniel Hannan, when he was cast during the Brexit referendum in 2016, was put out as the man who was the brain of Brexit. That this was the man who, if you had a Brexit question, then Dan was the man with the answer. He was the intellectual powerhouse. And of course, the originator of my favorite clip from Sky News, which we talk about all the time. Remember, Daniel Hannan said infamously, no one's talking about leaving the single market or customs union. Only a fool would leave the single market. And of course, this piece reeks of this was meant for like the Telegraph or the Express or the Daily Mail, but for one reason or another wasn't picked up by them. This really reeks of that. And we're going to read the first part because Dan is trying to explain why, or was in his opinion, the real reason why voters are warming up to the EU, the why of all these voters and Leave is doing so bad in all these polls that we've seen. He's going to try and ease the ideologue Brexiteer. And bizarrely, in the second half of this, talks about how Marie Le Pen, in his opinion, isn't considered far right. Yeah. So let's dive into this then, shall we? Let's, get your knives and forks ready because this is a bit of a meaty one. So before we do go diving in, please do remember to click on that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is the Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. There is the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. So let's go diving into this. This comes from Conservative Home with the title of Daniel Hannan, the real reason voters are warming up to the EU. They no longer have to hear about it. So let's see what he's got to say. And also, it's worth pointing out, because this must be a new title, because I've never seen this before. He is now apparently president of the Institute for Free Trade. Yet another probably dark money think tank that gets a lot of, should we say, suspicious funding from individuals. But there you go. So anyway, let's see what he's got to say about this. So there are various theories as to why Leave has fallen behind in the opinion polls. Some observers put it down to losers premium. This is... I would love to see what these various theories were and as to why, but that'll be funny to see. I'll have to see if there's any more out there, these theories as to why Leave has fallen behind in the opinion polls. So let's see what he else has to say. So a chunk of any electorate is disposed to resent the status quo, to assume that the grass is greener on the other side. The loser's premium is especially high in this case because of the cost of the lockdowns. Of course, that's what he's blaming this all on, which a certain kind of pundit has unscrupulously conflated with Brexit. Here's the thing, and we always say this when it comes to this. The lockdowns and COVID was an absolute gift to Brexiteers when it came to it. An absolute gift, because any problems with Brexit, especially in those first sort of couple of years, they could just sweep under the COVID carpet. Oh, that's not Brexit, that's COVID. But as we have gotten further and further away from COVID, the less they can pin the blame on that. And still, as you can still hear, oh, this isn't a Brexit problem, this is because of the lockdowns. And I want to remind you that Daniel Hannan was one of these crazy people who was like, we shouldn't lock down. What madness is this? We should be doing what Sweden is doing. Meanwhile, of course, Sweden did go into lockdown, and of course has a lot bigger and more intricate social safety net than we do. Like I say, remember, this is the country with government unemployment insurance. That's something on the left I think we should really look at bringing in over here. That would be kind of interesting to bring in over here. But let's continue on else what he's got to say. So, others think it has to do with the government's failure to seize the commercial and regulatory opportunities that opened up after 2020. First of all, commercial opportunities. You mean these trade deals that we've done with Australia and New Zealand, which aren't very good. This supposed upcoming one with India, which once again is probably not going to be very good. And these trade deals are going to have huge implications on the UK economy and industries here in the UK. But especially the one with Australia, which has a 15-year sort of decreasing of tariffs on a lot of Australian farm products coming in here. A lot of UK farmers are like, well, in 15 years, it's going to almost be next to impossible to compete with Australian farmers. Meanwhile, you've got the government, instead of trying to promote UK farmers to grow more stuff, they're now saying, well, look, we want you to become environmental land managers. The whole ELM program has not gone down well with farming communities at all. But he continues. And he says, who can doubt that they have a point? Still, others point out that Remain was always ahead in the polls. It was only with real ballots that Leave won. Again, interesting on that, because that is true. We were always ahead in the ballots. There's always a thing that says that if the referendum had been held a week later or even a week earlier, Remain could have very well easily won. And even then, Leave won. You won by a 2% margin. Yes, you won, but it wasn't, shall we say, the most clear-cut win you could claim. But, you know, they'll cling to that victory as long as they could. And of course, it's worth pointing out that there were numerous Brexiteers who would say, oh, well, we can have multiple referendums. We can have 2 referendums. And yet they've never, ever allowed, even for a second, to contemplate there being a second referendum or a second ask at that, because they might know that they could lose, because their precious Brexit already has not gone well. But he continues. There may be something in all these theories, but the one obvious explanation has, as far as I can tell, gone unconsidered. Put simply, our media are no longer full of negative stories about the EU. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why. Because this was the cottage industry that people like Daniel Hannan, Boris Johnson used to engage in on a weekly basis. Constant, made up stories, and the vast majority of them were made up. There is a website dedicated to all the negative EU stories, and they're like, actually, no, that's wrong. There was an EU regulation about this, but that doesn't mean what the news article made it out to be. We all remember, of course, the bendy bananas, the idea that they were going to get rid of the pint, that it was going to have to be sold in like liters and whatever. If those things never came to pass. The EU army. Remember, back then, as we saw with the discussion, that interesting time capsule that we did with the discussion between Thunderfoot and Sargon of Akkad, I forgot how big an issue the whole thing about the EU army, that the Brexiteers were making that out to be. Yeah, it's no longer there. He is right. They are no longer full of negative EU stories, because they can't blame the EU on a lot of these things anymore, because most of those stories used to be, The EU has done this. This is why the UK is failing. We should leave the EU. And they can't do those stories anymore because now, as we always said, the problems of the UK were never caused by the EU. They were caused by Tories, and more specifically, Tory austerity. And we are now at the point where all the austerity is coming home to roost. And the Tories have no one to blame but themselves. They have been in power for over 13 years, and since 2019, they have had a massive majority. There is no one stopping them doing what they want to do or anything like that. The only people that they have to blame are themselves, and everyone can see it, everyone knows it. And you cannot, in all good conscience, try and seriously put out a story and say, well, the reason why we're doing so badly is because of the EU. But we're not even in the EU, because if they did that, they would look ridiculous. That's why those stories are no longer there. But he continues. When we were members, the crises on the continent were our problem, and they still are our problem. This idea that we have left the EU and stuff on the continent not our problem. No, it's still our problem. The EU has not gone away. Problems on the continent still affect the UK. But this is the whole Brexiteer mindset of we can just ignore Europe and just ignore everything that's going on there and just carry on as if that was it. So a surge in migration across the Mediterranean, a row with Poland over the national sovereignty, an economic crisis in Germany. These things were big news. They are big news. That's the thing. If you do follow the news, these are big things, especially when it comes to things of, especially in foreign policy areas. We just can't ignore these. But Daniel Hannan likes to think, well, we don't have to talk about those. Don't have to worry about those anymore. Now, a downturn in Germany is no more intrinsically newsworthy than a downturn in Japan. I love it. Oh, yeah, it's not newsworthy. It's not newsworthy. Downturn in Germany, not newsworthy. Yeah. Europhile doesn't care what happens in Germany, doesn't care what even happens in Japan, apparently. Sometimes stuff that goes on in the countries is very newsworthy. And if there was like a major downturn in Germany, there is at the moment, but it's not as bad as we are in. Let's put it out there. But there you go. Yes, it will affect us as a trading partner, but it no longer has direct consequences for Britain. Yes, Dan, it does have consequences for us because, as you've just pointed out, they're one of our major trading partners. Post Brexit, that has not changed. Again, I can't believe you would write that saying, oh, it's not really newsworthy. You know, they're our largest trading partner, but it no longer has direct consequences on us. They're our largest trading partner. You've just admitted that. And this is why we still cover Daniel, because he's just an absolute lunatic. I don't think he even realizes what he's written there. But anyway, continues. And so tends to be regulated to the business pages. Indeed, it is astonishing how little Brussels features in the arguments of rejoiners who are evidently motivated by dislike of Eurosceptics rather than love of the EU. No, we do love the EU, but we know the EU isn't perfect. This is one of the things that we often saw, especially during 2016. They would argue this thing, oh, you just love Europe. You don't really like Brussels. And we would go, yeah, the EU's not perfect. No political body or institution is ever going to be like 100%, perfect. But even more for the reason to try and, improve it, make it better. The Eurosceptic point of view was never to improve upon it or make it better. The argument was just, we just need to leave it. because, quote, it's a dying institution. That has been their constant line all this time, still is today. The EU is a dying institution. The European market is a dying economy. It's not going to. Again, it's seen through this idea of free market fundamentalism, where because Europe is growing, but not as fast. Of course, the line isn't as vertical as they would like. This is why we need to go and start trading with South America, start trading with the Pacific Partnership, because their line is going up harder. Well, eventually, those lines will also start to peter off as their economies develop. Then what? Then who do we go and join? Do we leave the CCP? Because they'll be making arguments to leave the Pacific Partnership exactly along the same lines. But there you go. It continues. Yet the irritations that stirred leavers in the first place, the wastrel Eurocrats, the corrupt budgets, cancelled votes, have not gone away. The thing that used to exercise me most about the EU was the tendency to make up the law as it went along. What? How? No, I'm sorry. If the EU was just generally just making up law as it went along, no institution, no body could ever function that way at all. Interpreting every dot and comma of the treaties as a mandate for deeper integration. There you go. Bending the rules to punish people it disliked. And then, of course, he gets into the whole thing of Marine Le Pen being punished for embezzling. And you're like, well, no, hold on. Those allegations are pretty serious. And the rest of this article just dedicates to that, trying to say, oh, no, you don't understand. Marine Le Pen, all these allegations of embezzling, they're false because the EU just doesn't like her. She's not far right. But that's what he tries to make out in the rest of the article. Like I say, it's just pointless reading the rest of it. But it was good to read the first part, because I think, once again, it shows you the fact that he really can't admit or even spare a thought for a second to think that it's his own project that might be the problem, his own ideological issues that be the problem. No, it's still Europe. And I think this is why this strikes me as this was meant to be publicized in more papers, but they didn't pick it up because, as we've always said, these guys like Daniel Hannan will be forever obsessed with Europe bad, Europe bad, Europe bad. And that's all they can write about. And that cottage industry is gone. It's done. You can't continue to write about it because it makes you look absolutely foolish and a complete lunatic. But Daniel Hannan continues on. As always, he's a complete and absolute ideologue, and actually gets called an ideologue in the comments. Let me see if we can find it. Here we go. The first comment. I admire Mr. Hannan's past Brexit work, but as always, those with ideological views get drowned in the swamp of the establishment when they are promoted. I disagree with his views on Marine Le Pen, but has been convinced that she is, quote, far right, forgetting that that is the definition of an extremist when she is most definitely not. Oh, yeah. Like I say, this, like I say, and there's even more comments that do go on to disagree with Hannan, calling him a bit of an ideologue, saying, "Why are you blaming the EU? We're not in it anymore. It's a bit pointless to blame it for our woes. If Remain is in lead, then it is because your own project is failing, and the fact that you guys colossally overpromised on it. That's the reason." But hey, there you go. It was your project. It's not up for us to make it succeed. It's for you to make it succeed. You're the one meant to be proving us wrong. But there you go. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.